They say history is written by the winners, but sometimes history pauses, turns around, and asks the losers to explain the ink stains on their fingers. This is not a shout, not a chant, not a call for punishment. It is simply a quiet walk through the corridors of public records, opened by court orders, unlocked by inspectors general, and placed under soft museum lights so that any curious mind can follow the paper trail without tripping over politics. We begin on a rainy morning in January when a small stack of printed emails was carried into a hearing room on Capitol Hill. The pages were warm from the laser printer, black and white, smelling of toner and faint coffee. A committee staffer had highlighted 3 sentences in pastel yellow, the kind of highlight that looks gentle but feels like a tap on the shoulder. Those 3 sentences mentioned a server, a closet, and a label that read, "Unclassified, so sensitive." No dramatic music, no flashing red lights, just the hush of papers being turned slowly, one after another, like a deck of cards that nobody wanted to shuffle. The server in question lived in a square-shaped closet in a quiet house in Chappaqua, New York. The closet had no window, no ventilation fan, and a small desk fan that whirred like a tired bee. On the desk sat a gray Dell tower, its power button glowing steady blue. Outside the closet, autumn leaves collected against the patio door. Inside, the hard drive spun 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 4 consecutive years. Every midnight, an automatic backup began, sending copies of every message to a cloud folder labeled PST Archive 001. The folder was protected by a password that, according to notes later released by the FBI, was simply the current year followed by an exclamation mark. It was not complicated, but it was convenient. And convenience often dresses up as innocence when nobody is looking. Years later, investigators would describe the setup as unusual for a cabinet-level official, which is government speak for "we have never seen this before, and we hope we never see it again." Still, the existence of the server was not secret. Technicians knew, household staff knew, even the local internet provider knew, because monthly bandwidth overages triggered friendly reminder emails that began, "Dear customer, you have exceeded your data plan." Those reminders were automatically forwarded to an assistant, who paid the bills with a government credit card and filed the receipts in a yellow folder marked Miss. In June of 2011, a cable arrived at the State Department headquarters in Washington. It was labeled routine, but its contents were anything but routine. Diplomatic security officers in Benghazi were requesting additional sandbags, extra flashlights, and 50 feet of chains that could be used to pull heavy gates shut in an emergency. The cable was read by a night-duty officer, who saved it to a shared drive and sent a short summary to the secretary's office. The summary was printed, placed in a plastic basket, and carried to the executive suite. Somewhere between the basket and the secretary's desk, the summary slipped to the bottom of the pile beneath briefing cards about an upcoming trade visit to Australia. 3 months later, on the night of September 11th, the same officers who had requested sandbags found themselves standing on a rooftop, listening to the crackle of automatic fire echoing across a city that had lost electricity. They had flashlights, but the batteries were weak. They had gates, but no chains. 2 Americans died that night, one from smoke inhalation and one from shrapnel. The next morning, the sun rose over the Mediterranean, pale and quiet, as if nothing unusual had happened. In the hearing room, the Benghazi cable was placed next to the server log, and someone noticed that the timestamp on the cable matched the timestamp on an email forwarded to the secretary's private account. The email had been read, but it had not been answered. Back in Washington, the workday began at 8 o'clock sharp. Staffers walked past the Starbucks on C Street, balancing lattes and folders, tapping security badges against electronic readers that beeped like patient metronomes. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the elevators spoke in polite female voices. Second floor, Department of Public Affairs. On the 7th floor, the secretary's suite smelled of fresh coffee and dry erase markers. A large whiteboard listed countries in alphabetical order, each name followed by a colored magnet. Green for stable, yellow for watch, red for concern. Libya was yellow in June, orange in July, and red by September. The magnets were moved by a young staffer who had never been to Libya, but who had stayed up late reading news reports and Twitter threads. Moving a magnet is a small gesture, but in a building where symbols carry weight, the difference between yellow and red can feel like the difference between caution and alarm. Still, magnets do not stop bullets, and whiteboards do not send rescue teams. They only record what someone has already decided to notice. When the server story finally surfaced, it did not arrive with a thunderclap. It trickled out during a routine press briefing when a reporter asked why the secretary had used a personal email address instead of a government one. The spokesperson shrugged, smiled, and said, "For convenience." Those two words were repeated on cable channels, tweeted, memed, and printed on coffee mugs that sold for $19.95 on an online store that also offered wristbands reading, "Stay calm and carry on." For a while, the phrase sounded harmless, even charming, like a busy mom explaining why she bought pre-washed lettuce. But convenience has a cousin called consequence, and consequence rarely announces its arrival in advance. Instead, it waits backstage, listening for its cue, and walks on quietly when the laughter dies down. In the spring of 2015, the server was unplugged and carried to a small IT shop in Denver. The technician, a soft-spoken man named Paul, wore rectangular glasses and a polo shirt with a tiny logo of a mountain range. He was told to wipe the data because the machine was no longer needed. Paul understood the request, but he also understood that wipe is a word with degrees. He could delete files, he could reformat the drive, or he could use a program called BleachBit that overwrites every byte with random ones and zeros, like scattering confetti across a gym floor after prom. He chose the third option, clicked Start, and watched a progress bar creep across the screen. Outside, snowflakes melted on the windshield of his Honda Civic. Inside, the hard drive hummed, sighed, and finally fell silent. Years later, when investigators asked Paul why he had chosen such a thorough method, he shrugged and said, "I wanted to do a good job." Doing a good job is usually praised, but in this case, it raised questions about whether the confetti was meant to celebrate or to conceal. Still, Paul was not a political operative. He was a technician who liked clean workspaces and clear to-do lists. He had simply followed instructions, and the instructions had seemed reasonable at the time. Meanwhile, in a brick townhouse in Georgetown, a retired journalist named Susan sat at her kitchen table, flipping through printed emails that had been released under the Freedom of Information Act. Susan drank lemon tea and underlined phrases with a purple pen. She noticed that some messages contained black rectangles where sentences had been redacted. The rectangles were neat, almost artistic, like windows painted shut. Susan's curiosity was not angry. It was professional. She had spent 30 years reading documents, looking for patterns, and she knew that redactions often reveal as much as they hide. If a message about a birthday party was fully visible, but a message about a uranium mine was half blacked out, the contrast told a story without needing exposition. Susan clipped the pages together, slipped them into a manila folder, and walked to the public library, where she scanned the folder and uploaded it to a blog that averaged 43 readers a day. One of those readers was a graduate student who specialized in nuclear policy. He noticed the same rectangles, and he asked a question that would eventually travel through congressional offices and into a hearing room where the air smelled of wood polish and quiet urgency. The question was simple: why would a private foundation accept donations from foreign investors who stood to benefit from a government decision? The foundation in question had been established to build libraries, fight childhood obesity, and provide relief after natural disasters. Its tax returns were public, its mission statement was optimistic, and its annual gala featured celebrities who smiled politely while holding crystal glasses of sparkling water. The donations arrived through wire transfers, checks, and sometimes bags of cash that were counted in a back room and deposited within 48 hours. The cash was converted into cashier's checks, and the cashier's checks were deposited into accounts that funded health clinics, school gardens, and microloans for women in remote villages. Much of the money did, in fact, help people. Children received vaccinations, farmers bought seeds, teachers attended workshops. But some of the money came from investors who had also applied for permits to mine uranium in the American West. The permits were approved by a committee that included the Secretary of State, whose husband ran the foundation. No single person wrote a memo saying, "Approve the permit because we received a donation." Instead, the approval traveled through a maze of subcommittees, legal reviews, and briefings that left no fingerprints. The graduate student who noticed the pattern wrote a paper, uploaded it to an academic server, and cited every source. The paper was read by a congressional aide who printed it, stapled it, and placed it in a folder that would eventually sit on the desk of an investigator who preferred lemon tea and purple pens. In the hearing room, the investigator asked quiet questions. She did not raise her voice. She did not pound the table. She simply placed two documents side by side: a thank you letter from the foundation and a press release announcing the uranium permit. The dates were 6 months apart. The letter was polite. The press release was upbeat. And both were written in the passive voice, as if events had occurred by themselves. The investigator asked, "Did you see these dates?" The witness said, "I don't recall." The investigator nodded, made a note, and moved on. Outside the window, a squirrel ran along a branch, paused, and twitched its tail, as if reminding everyone that the world still contained ordinary things like acorns and bark. The story grew, but it never exploded. Instead, it seeped into conversations at backyard barbecues and coffee shops, where laptops sat open next to muffins. Someone would mention the server, someone else would mention Benghazi, and a third person would shrug and say, "All politicians do it." The shrug was not an endorsement. It was a surrender, the kind of gesture people make when they feel too small to move a mountain. But mountains are moved by wind and water over time, and stories are moved by repetition. A grandmother in Ohio repeated the tale to her grandson, who repeated it in a college essay, which was read by a professor who included it in a lecture that was recorded and uploaded to a website that averaged 400 views. One of those viewers was a cartoonist who drew a panel showing a mountain labeled "Trust" being chipped away by tiny pickaxes labeled "Details." The cartoon was shared on social media, where it received 12,000 likes and 300 comments, some angry, some amused, some simply relieved to discover that other people had noticed the mountain too. Years passed. The secretary left office, wrote a book, and went on a speaking tour where tickets cost $99 and included a photo opportunity. Audiences arrived in suits and dresses, clutching programs that listed the secretary's accomplishments. A peace deal here, a health initiative there, a scholarship for girls in countries where girls had been discouraged from attending school. The speeches were punctuated by applause, and the applause was punctuated by security guards who stood near the exits with polite smiles and earpieces that glowed faint blue. After each event, the secretary signed books at a table draped in burgundy cloth. People waited in lines that snaked around lobby pillars, and when they reached the table, they often said, "Thank you for your service." The secretary smiled, signed her name with a black Sharpie, and handed the book back with both hands, the way a flight attendant hands over a cup of coffee. Warm, steady, reassuring. No one mentioned the server, the uranium, or the black rectangles. The mountain had not disappeared. It had simply been landscaped, planted with flowers, and surrounded by a fence that discouraged climbing. But fences break, and flowers wilt, and mountains have long memories. In 2025, a new Attorney General took office, promising not revenge, but review. She established a task force staffed by accountants, translators, and retired librarians who had once worked for the government printing office. Their mission was not to prosecute, but to organize, to place every released email, every tax return, every calendar entry into a single searchable database that could be accessed by any citizen with a library card. The project was called the Public Ledger, and it was funded by a bipartisan appropriation that passed the Senate with 0 dissenting votes. The ledger went live on a Tuesday morning. By lunchtime, the website had crashed twice under the weight of curious clicks. By evening, a high school student in Kansas had created a timeline that matched donations to policy decisions using color-coded threads that resembled a friendship bracelet. The timeline was printed in a youth magazine, which mailed copies to every public high school in the country. Teachers hung the timeline on bulletin boards, and students added sticky notes that asked questions like, "Is this legal?" and "Who approved this?" The questions were not accusations, they were invitations to look closer, to practice the ancient art of noticing. In the quiet of her study, the Attorney General opened a copy of the timeline and ran her finger along the threads. She had not created the timeline, but she had unlocked the door that allowed it to exist. She felt no triumph, only a solemn recognition that transparency is less a victory than a responsibility. She drafted a letter to the former secretary, inviting her to appear before a public forum where questions would be asked, answers would be recorded, and the video would be archived for anyone to watch. The letter was polite, the kind of letter one might send to an elderly neighbor who has misplaced a garden tool. It began, "Dear Madam," and ended, "Respectfully yours." There was no threat, only an appointment. The former secretary accepted, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because she believed that stories deserve endings. The forum was held in a small auditorium that smelled of fresh paint and old books. The audience included college students, retired diplomats, and a woman who had once worked as a stenographer during the Watergate hearings. The Attorney General wore a navy blazer and pearl earrings. The former secretary wore a lavender scarf and a silver bracelet that caught the light whenever she gestured. Between them stood a table with a carafe of water and 2 glasses. No cameras flashed. The event was streamed live, and the only sound was the soft click of keyboards as reporters filed updates in real time. The questions were read aloud by a moderator who spoke slowly, as if each word were a stepping stone across a wide river. The answers were sometimes detailed, sometimes vague, sometimes punctuated by a pause so long that the audience could hear the air conditioning hum. When the forum ended, both women stood, shook hands, and posed for a single photograph that would later be used in textbooks under the heading Civic Discourse. Outside the auditorium, a reporter asked the Attorney General if justice had been served. She replied, "Justice is a process, not a headline." The quote was tweeted, retweeted, and cross-stitched onto a pillow that sold for $29 on an artisan website. The pillow was displayed on a couch in a living room where a child asked, "What does that mean?" The parent paused, then said, "It means we keep asking questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable." The child nodded and returned to a puzzle whose pieces formed a picture of a mountain. The mountain was not yet complete. Some pieces were missing, but the outline was clear enough to recognize. And so the story continues. Not with thunder, but with whispers. Not with handcuffs, but with highlighters. Not with verdicts, but with voluntary appearances. The server now sits in a climate-controlled warehouse, its serial number catalogued, its hard drive imaged and stored on a shelf that resembles a library stack. The Benghazi cable is laminated and displayed at a museum where visitors can read every word, including the black rectangles that have been replaced with the original text, now declassified. The uranium mine operates under new ownership, its profits taxed, and its environmental impact monitored by a bipartisan commission. The foundation still funds school gardens, though its board now includes an ethicist who publishes annual transparency reports. The timeline hangs in a high school hallway, updated each semester by students who add new threads and new questions. The mountain remains, but it is no longer hidden behind fences. It is open for hiking, for study, for anyone willing to climb slowly and breathe deeply. If you have read this far, you have climbed part of the mountain. You may feel breathless, not from outrage, but from altitude. That is normal. The air is thinner up here, but the view is clearer. You can see the path that brought us here. A series of small decisions made by people who did not intend to harm, but who also did not intend to look too closely. You can see the path forward. A series of small corrections made by people who are willing to look, to ask, to listen. The descent is not glamorous. It involves filing reports, attending meetings, and teaching children how to highlight documents in pastel colors. But every step down is also a step toward level ground where democracy can walk without stumbling. The mountain will not disappear. It will become a landmark, a reminder that elevation offers perspective, and that perspective, when shared, becomes a map for the next traveler. There is no final curtain, no swelling soundtrack, no credits rolling past a list of names. There is only the quiet sound of papers being turned, one page at a time, by hands that belong to no particular hero. The hands might be yours tonight, as you open a PDF you downloaded from a government archive. The room might be quiet, except for the soft click of your mouse and the occasional sigh of your refrigerator. Outside, a street lamp flickers, and a neighbor's cat prowls across a narrow fence. You read, you highlight, you pause. You are not changing the world in that moment. You are simply noticing it. And noticing, as it turns out, is the first draft of accountability. The second draft is the conversation you have tomorrow, over coffee, when you mention the timeline and your friend says, "I didn't know that." The third draft is the letter you write to your representative, asking for continued funding of the public ledger. The fourth draft is the vote you cast in the next election. The fifth draft is the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you did not shrug. You pointed, you asked, you climbed. The mountain is still there, but now it has a trail, a cairn of stones placed by countless hands that refuse to surrender curiosity. The trail is not steep. It is marked by questions, not by answers. Walk it slowly. Stop often. Breathe. Notice the small flowers that grow in the cracks, their petals open to the sky, their roots anchored in stone. They are not spectacular, but they are alive, and they remind us that even rock can be softened by persistence, by wind, by water, by the slow, steady pressure of people who refuse to look away. The trail, however, does not end at the summit. It curves gently downward into a valley where the air is warmer and the conversation looser. Here, the flowers are brighter, the birds less shy, and the conversations drift from subpoenas to school lunches, from redacted footnotes to the price of milk. It is easy to linger in this valley, to convince oneself that the climb was entertainment, a weekend hike with rhetorical binoculars. But valleys can flood, and when the rains come, usually in October, always during budget season, the water rises quickly, seeping into basements where old servers are sometimes stored just in case. The same technician who once wiped a drive in Denver now finds himself unscrewing a panel, checking for moisture, labeling cables with blue tape that reads, "Do not power on." He is older, calmer, still careful, still following instructions. But now the instructions include a new line. Document everything. So he photographs each cord, each serial number, each speck of rust that looks like a coffee stain, but might be something more. He saves the photos to a folder named Valley Flood 25 and uploads it to a shared drive that automatically timestamps every upload, every download, every curious click from a graduate student in Kyoto who is writing a thesis on digital preservation. The circle widens, the story travels, the mountain casts a longer shadow. In the shadow, a librarian named Angela catalogs the photos, cross-referencing them with email metadata, flight logs, and donation receipts. Angela wears cotton cardigans and drinks cinnamon tea. She has never been to Denver, never touched a server, never stood on a rooftop in Benghazi, but she knows how to build a finding aid that can guide a stranger through 40 terabytes of chaos. She types slowly, steadily, her fingers curved like gentle hooks that lift each fact out of the murky water and place it on a labeled shelf. Cable, 2011, 11. Invoice, 2012, 03, 15. Thank you note, 2013, 07, 22. The shelves are virtual, of course, but Angela pictures them as oak, polished by the soft sleeves of researchers who will arrive years from now, looking for a single sentence that might explain how a peace-loving republic learned to fear its own amnesia. She adds keywords: server, uranium, flood, valley, remember. The last keyword is her own invention. It is not required, but it feels necessary. When she is done, she saves the finding aid, closes her laptop, and walks home past a playground where children chase each other around a slide shaped like a rocket ship. Their laughter sounds like scattered data points, random and joyful, the opposite of everything she has been cataloging. She smiles anyway, because laughter is also a timestamp, proof that the story has not yet swallowed the storytellers. One of those children, a boy with a cowlick and a Superman t-shirt, will grow up to become a junior senator from a prairie state. He will campaign on a platform of open stacks and open minds, a phrase he borrowed from Angela's high school presentation during a Civics Day visit. He will not mention the server by name. Instead, he will speak of digital stewardship and public trust, terms that sound forward-looking but carry the faint scent of past floods. During his first committee hearing, he will place Angela's printed finding aid on the desk in front of him, its pages numbered, its margins wide. He will ask a witness, a silver-haired woman in a lavender scarf, whether she believes transparency is a destination or a journey. The woman will pause, touch her bracelet, and reply, "Transparency is a mirror. If you do not like what you see, the fault is not in the glass." The audience will murmur, unsure whether the line is profound or evasive, but the senator will nod because mirrors can be cleaned, and cleaning is a process he understands. He will thank the woman, enter her answer into the record, and upload the video to the same public ledger that once crashed under the weight of curious clicks. The circle widens again. The mountain's reflection appears in the mirror. And this time, It does not flicker. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb of Cleveland, a retired couple named Martha and Louise receive a postcard from their granddaughter, who is studying abroad in Ljubljana. The postcard shows a medieval castle on a hill, its stone walls glowing orange in the sunset. On the back, the granddaughter has written, "History here is layered, like sediment. You can see the Roman stones, the medieval mortar, the modern graffiti. Each layer tells the truth of its time. I think we are a layer too. Love, Anna." Martha places the postcard on the kitchen windowsill, propped against a glass jar filled with cinnamon tea bags. Luis reads the message aloud, his voice soft, practiced, the voice of a man who once read bedtime stories about trains that could talk. They discuss the word sediment, how it sounds like sentiment, how both words involve settling. Martha opens her tablet, searches for public ledger, and types uranium into the finding aid. She is not angry, she is curious, the way a child is curious about dinosaurs or storms. She prints 3 pages, clips them to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, and begins to highlight sentences in pastel yellow. Luis watches, sips coffee, and occasionally asks, "What does this acronym mean?" Martha looks it up, reads the definition aloud, and they both nod, satisfied, the way one nods when the last piece of a puzzle snaps into place. They do not feel powerful, but they do feel present. And presence is a kind of power that does not require headlines. The highlighted pages travel to a neighborhood potluck, tucked inside a plastic folder that also holds the recipe for Martha's famous lemon bars. The folder is passed from hand to hand, along with casserole dishes and anecdotes about grandchildren. Someone suggests starting a monthly document discussion club, the civic equivalent of a book club, but with footnotes. They meet in the community room of the public library, beneath a ceiling painted to look like a sky full of clouds. The first meeting attracts 7 people. The second attracts 12. The third attracts a local reporter who writes a gentle feature titled, "Retirees Unravel Redactions, One Highlight at a Time." The story is picked up by a national wire service, shortened, sweetened, and retitled "Grandma vs. the Black Boxes," which is not accurate, but is irresistible. The group laughs, prints the headline, and tapes it to the wall above the coffee urn. They are not activists. They are readers who have discovered that citizenship can be exercised with a highlighter and a plate of lemon bars. They do not shout. They underline. They do not march. They margin note. Their revolution is punctuation deep, but punctuation can change meaning, and meaning can change memory, and memory can change votes, and votes can change policy, and policy, slowly, quietly, like water freezing and thawing inside a crack, can change mountains. On the mountain, the next hiker arrives earlier than expected. She is 16, wearing second-hand boots and carrying a notebook bound with rubber bands. Her name is Jade, and she has never heard of Benghazi or uranium deals, but she has been assigned a school project titled "How to Read a Primary Source." She stumbles upon the public ledger while searching for an example of reliable metadata. The database greets her with a pop-up that reads, "Welcome, researcher. Take your time." Jade takes screenshots, pastes them into her presentation, and adds a slide titled "What I Learned." The bullet points are simple. Documents are stories told by strangers. Redactions are doors, not walls. Curiosity is respectful. She presents the slide to her classmates, who blink, yawn, and then, almost accidentally, ask questions. The teacher, sensing momentum, extends the lesson by 1 day, then 2, then a week. By semester's end, the class has built a miniature exhibit in the school hallway, printed emails hung with clothespins, Yellow highlights flickering under fluorescent lights, a hand-drawn map titled From Server to Server, a journey of 1,973 miles. Parents visit on a Wednesday evening, sipping apple cider from paper cups, nodding slowly, surprised by how much they do not know. Jade's mother takes a photograph of the exhibit and texts it to Jade's uncle, who works in city government. The uncle forwards the photo to a colleague who oversees youth civic programs. The colleague applies for a grant. The grant is approved. The circle widens. The mountain casts its shadow across a new playground, where a slide shaped like a rocket ship has been repainted with tiny yellow highlights that glow under ultraviolet light, invisible to the adult eye but dazzling to any child who bothers to look up. And so the sediment keeps settling, layer upon layer, each one thinner than the last, but each one adding height, weight, memory. The story no longer belongs to the committee, the secretary, the technician, or the librarian. It belongs to the lemonade-stained fingers of retirees, to the cow-licked boy who will one day filibuster for cleaner mirrors, to the granddaughter who sees castles in Slovenia and sediment in Ohio. The mountain is still there, but it is no longer a barrier. It is a landmark, a reference point, a place to orient the compass of curiosity. The trail is well marked now, not with flags, but with footnotes, each one a cairn that says, someone passed here, paused, looked, and remembered. The descent is gentle, the valley is wide, and the river that once flooded now meanders peacefully, reflecting clouds that look like paragraphs floating across a pale blue page. If you stand on the bank and listen closely, you can hear the soft clack of keyboards, the rustle of pages, the satisfied sigh of a puzzle completed. The sound is not dramatic. It is the quiet music of citizenship, played in common time, one note per question, one rest per answer. A melody that repeats as long as there are readers willing to hum along. The melody drifts downstream, past the playground, past the library, past the sunflower magnet on Martha's refrigerator, until it reaches a small recording booth tucked inside a community college in Des Moines. The booth is actually a converted storage closet, 6 feet by 8 feet, lined with egg crate foam that still smells faintly of industrial adhesive. A student named Devin sits inside, headphones clamped over his locks, a pop filter taped to a bent coat rack. He is 19, studying audio engineering, and tonight he is volunteering to record audiobooks for the visually impaired. The book he has been assigned is not a mystery or a romance. It is a slim volume titled Primary Source Companion, Volume 3, the Public Ledger Series. The pages are dense with footnotes, but Devin has discovered that if he reads them slowly, pausing after every comma, inhaling after every semicolon, the footnotes begin to sound like poetry. He presses record, leans toward the mic, and speaks the first line. Note 74, Cable, Benghazi, 2012, 09911. Routine classification upgraded to urgent at 0301. His voice is baritone, warm, a little tired from pulling a double shift at the cafeteria, but the fatigue adds gravity, the way a scuffed guitar can still hold a tune. When he reaches the phrase, "sandbags insufficient," his throat tightens. Not from emotion exactly, but from recognition. He once worked a summer job at a stadium where sandbags were stacked against flooding, and he remembers how the bags felt, heavy and damp, like history itself. He finishes the chapter, saves the file as WAV 48K Hz 24-bit, and uploads it to the college server, where it will be synchronized with Braille displays and distributed through an app that averages 1,200 downloads a month. Most listeners are older. Some are veterans. One is a woman who lost her sight in a factory accident and now listens to primary sources while knitting scarves for refugees. She will never see the yellow highlights, but she will hear the pause Devon inserts before the word urgent, and that pause will tell her everything she needs to know about the moment the world shifted. The file travels farther than Devon expects. A podcast producer in Portland, half asleep, cruising for content, stumbles across the recording, clips the Benghazi section, and weaves it into an episode titled When Cables Cry. The episode is downloaded 40,000 times in the first week, prompting a Reddit thread that reaches the front page under the headline, "Till a College Kid's Voice Unearthed a 13-year-old timestamp." Someone on the thread isolates the audio, runs it through a spectral analyzer, and notices a faint 60-cycle hum in the background, the ghost of fluorescent lights that flickered above Devon's head. Another user overlays the hum onto a map of power grid frequencies, confirming the recording was made in the Midwest. The investigation is pointless, playful, and profoundly human. Strangers collaborating to locate a closet in Iowa based on an electrical whisper. Devon sees the thread, laughs, and posts a selfie from the booth. Foam walls, coat rack mic, grin wide. The comment section explodes with praise, offers of internships, and one marriage proposal that is clearly a joke but still makes his mother screenshot it and frame it above the TV. None of this changes the facts of the cable, but it changes the reach of the facts, stretching them across time zones, languages, levels of expertise. A timestamp that once sat in a classified folder now lives in a WAV file, which lives in an MP3, which lives in a streaming cache, which lives in a memory stick plugged into a Braille note-taker in a village outside Lagos. The circle widens. The mountain's echo grows multilingual. Back in Washington, the echo reaches a Senate subcommittee hearing on digital accessibility. A junior senator, Jade's uncle, the one who forwarded the sunflower magnet photo, plays 30 seconds of Devon's recording into the official record. The room falls quiet, not out of reverence for the content, but out of reverence for the cadence. The way a 19-year-old voice can make bureaucracy sound like a lullaby, or like a warning, or like both at once. The senator proposes an amendment. Every declassified document released to the public must also be released in audio format within 30 days. Narrated by qualified community voices. The amendment passes unanimously, not because lawmakers love poetry, but because they recognize that accessibility is no longer a courtesy. It is a constituency. Within a year, recording booths pop up in libraries across the country, closets lined with foam, coat rack mics, the same faint 60-cycle hum. The booths are booked solid, retirees reading Iran-Contra memos, theater majors tackling the Pentagon Papers, a baritone Marine who brings his own pop filter shaped like an eagle. Each recording is tagged with a metadata field titled Narrator Context, where readers can type a single sentence about themselves. Devon's entry reads, "I fry chicken in the cafeteria, but I prefer frequencies to French fries." A listener in Reykjavik favorites the entry, adds it to a playlist called Voices That Sway, and streams it during the long aurora nights. The playlist is shared, shrunk, remixed, and eventually sampled by an ambient musician who layers the phrase "sandbags insufficient" over a bed of Nordic synth. The track is titled Insufficient, Aurora Edit, and it climbs to number 47 on a college radio chart, prompting a musicologist to write a paper on the tonal intersection of bureaucratic grief and glacial reverb. The paper is uploaded to an open-access repository, where it is downloaded by a sound artist in Seoul, who loops the reverb into an installation that plays inside an abandoned subway tunnel. Visitors walk through the tunnel, footsteps echoing, while Devon's recorded voice, now stretched, pitch shifted, harmonized, repeats the word urgent until it loses meaning and becomes pure vibration. A ghost in the circuitry, a reminder that information never dies. It simply changes costume. Meanwhile, in the tunnel, a woman named Hannah records a video on her phone. She is a tour guide by day, a poet by night, and she speaks in a whisper because the tunnel acoustics are so precise that a whisper feels like confidences shared under a blanket. She pans her camera across the concrete walls, catching the flicker of LED strips that pulse in sync with the music. When she reaches the speaker mounted at the far end, she lingers, letting the viewers hear the looped word urgent dissolve into vowels. She uploads the video to a platform that specializes in slow media, clips longer than 10 minutes, no jump cuts, minimal captions. The video is viewed by a civil servant in Brussels who is drafting guidelines for sonic archiving. The guidelines propose that every EU member state maintain a sound museum of declassified documents, rendered not as dry readings, but as emotionally truthful interpretations. The civil servant cites Seoul's subway installation as a case study, footnoting Devon's original recording, the Reddit spectral analysis thread, and the baritone Marine's eagle-shaped pop filter. The footnote is formatted in accordance with ISO 690, proofread by an intern who specializes in Baltic punctuation, and published in the official journal of the European Union. A librarian in Tallinn prints the journal, scans the footnote, and pins it to a corkboard labeled Impossible Provenance, where it hangs next to a postcard of a Slovenian castle and a sunflower magnet that somehow traveled from Ohio to the Baltic via Reykjavik. The corkboard is photographed, hashtagged, and uploaded to a Slack channel for peripheral metadata enthusiasts, where it is emoji-reacted with a taco, a mountain, and a chicken drumstick, because the internet is still the internet, even when the stakes are serious. The mountain, for its part, remains unmoved in the geological sense, its granite still compressed, its summit still high, but it has become porous in the informational sense. Every footnote, every loop, every emoji is another hole through which light passes. Geologists call this weathering, librarians call it access, teenagers call it vibe. Whatever the label, the result is a slow translucence. The mountain grows lighter, not smaller. You can see through it now, if you angle your gaze correctly, all the way to the valley where Martha and Luis are teaching a neighbor how to highlight documents without bleeding through the paper. They recommend pastel yellow, 0.5 mm tip, and a gentle wrist. The neighbor nods, tries a stroke, smiles at the faint line that appears like dawn on the page. She has never read a primary source before, but she recognizes dawn when she sees it. The neighbor's name is Evelyn. She is 73, and she has spent 40 years working the night shift at a cereal packaging plant. Her fingertips are still calloused from grasping cardboard boxes, but they are gentle on the page. She highlights a sentence that mentions flashlights with weak batteries, and she remembers the blackout of '03, when her apartment building went dark and she lit a single candle that dripped wax onto the kitchen table. The memory is personal, not political, yet it bridges the gap between her life and a rooftop in Benghazi. She says aloud, "Weak batteries feel the same everywhere." Martha nods, pours more cinnamon tea, and the three of them, Martha, Luis, Evelyn, form a small triangle of shared recognition. No one argues about parties or personalities. They simply agree that batteries should be strong, that gates should have chains, that requests for help should not fall through the cracks. The agreement is quiet, almost mundane, but it is the kind of consensus that democracies are built on. Ordinary people, discovering that their ordinary fears overlap. Evelyn goes home with 3 printed pages, a borrowed highlighter, and the determination to read the rest of the document under better light. She lives alone, so she reads aloud to her cat, a calico named Census. Census purrs, or maybe she doesn't, but the sound of Evelyn's voice fills the room, and that is enough. The next morning, Evelyn calls her grandson, who is studying engineering at a community college 20 miles away. She asks him to explain what metadata means. He draws a tiny stick figure on a sticky note, adds a timestamp, a GPS dot, and a heart. "That's Grandma, at 7:03 a.m. loving me," he says. Evelyn laughs, sticks the note to her fridge, and suddenly, metadata feels less like jargon and more like a love letter that happens to include coordinates. The grandson, whose name is Leo, drives over that weekend with a laptop and a free program called Audacity. He records Evelyn reading the highlighted pages, her voice slow and steady, the way she used to read him bedtime stories about trains that talked. He removes background hum, normalizes volume, exports the file as MP3, 128 kbps, and uploads it to the same repository where Devon's cafeteria baritone lives. The new file is tagged Voice, Midwestern Grandmother, 73, Serial Plant Retiree, and the metadata field, Narrator Context, reads, "I just want the truth to sound like someone you know." Within days, the file is streamed by a long-haul trucker driving overnight from Des Moines to Denver. He listens through earbuds, the cab lit only by dashboard green, the highway a ribbon of reflective paint. When Evelyn says weak batteries, the trucker glances at his own flashlight clipped to the passenger seat, checks that the batteries are fresh, and feels a small shiver of solidarity that keeps him awake until sunrise. He posts a short review. "Sounds like my mom. 5 stars." The review is not analytical, but it is algorithmically counted, and the file rises a few places in the most comforting playlist, nestled between a Welsh farmer reading tax reform memos and a Haitian choir singing earthquake relief invoices. The playlist is discovered by a sleep app developer who samples Evelyn's phrase, "the same everywhere," and loops it into a lullaby mixed with ocean waves. The lullaby tops the insomnia relief chart for 3 weeks, and Evelyn, who has never owned a smartphone, hears about it from Leo, who plays the track on his phone. She listens, blinks, smiles, and says, "Well, that's something." Royalties are negligible, but the app sends her a ceramic mug printed with her own words, "the same everywhere." She drinks cinnamon tea from it every morning, and the mug becomes a gentle monument, the kind that fits in the palm of your hand. Across the ocean, in a small town outside Ljubljana, the granddaughter who sent the castle postcard, her name is Tiasha, finds the lullaby while scrolling through playlists during a late-night study session. She recognizes the cadence of Midwestern vowels, thinks of her grandmother's friend in Ohio, and feels the circle tighten. She writes a paper for her media ethics class titled "From Cable to Lullaby: How Primary Sources Become Comfort Sounds." The professor, amused and intrigued, submits the paper to a student conference in Vienna. Chasha presents wearing a lavender scarf borrowed from her roommate, not for fashion, but for continuity. She wants the scarf that once appeared in a ceremonial photo to reappear in an academic context, proof that objects, like stories, can travel through multiple identities. Her presentation opens with a 10-second clip of Evelyn's voice saying, "weak batteries," slowed to half speed so that each consonant hovers like a lantern. The audience, mostly grad students fueled by cheap white wine, falls silent. When the lights come up, a boy in the back row raises his hand and asks, Is this what democracy sounds like when it's tired? Chasha doesn't have an answer, but she writes the question in her notebook, where it will later become the epigraph of her master's thesis. The conference organizers upload the presentation video to their YouTube channel, where it receives 1,427 views, 48 likes, and one comment in Korean that translates roughly to, "I feel less alone." The comment becomes the title of a Korean-language podcast that reads declassified U.S. documents aloud, aimed at viewers who want to practice English while learning about transparency. The host, a Seoul librarian named Min Ho, begins each episode with Evelyn's slowed-down phrase, a sonic handshake across continents. Back in Des Moines, Leo hears the Korean podcast through a language learning app. He doesn't understand the words, but he recognizes Evelyn's timbre, the way you might recognize your mother's humming through a closed door. He screenshots the waveform, texts it to Evelyn with the caption, "You're international now." She replies with a voice memo, "Tell them I said annyeong, annyeong." She practices the greeting for an hour, senses the cat blinking from the windowsill. The next day, she visits Leo's college and asks the international office secretary how to write the same everywhere in Hangul. The secretary, a Korean grad student named Hyejin, translates it as Aodina dogatayo, Aodina tokgatayo, and shows Evelyn how to shape the characters with a calligraphy brush. Evelyn practices on printer paper, her strokes shaky but sincere. Hyejin photographs the sheet, posts it on Instagram with hashtags at our grandma and Hangul, to our transparency across borders, and the post gains 12,000 likes within 2 days. A Seoul stationery company prints the phrase on a limited edition bookmark, donating proceeds to a nonprofit that supplies flashlights to refugees. The flashlights are shipped in boxes labeled "Weak Batteries Not Included," a private joke that doubles as quality control. Each flashlight is tested before shipping, its beam photographed and uploaded to a public folder titled Proof of Light. Min Ho, the podcast host, includes a screenshot of the folder in his show notes, closing the loop that began with a single highlighted sentence in an Iowa kitchen. The loop, of course, is not really closed. It is a spiral, widening with each rotation. The flashlights arrive in a camp in northern Iraq, where a boy named Farid uses one to read a comic book about superheroes who solve problems by asking questions. The comic is a translation of a Japanese manga that was itself inspired by a Twitter thread about the public ledger. Farid likes the part where the hero says, "Truth is a flashlight. You only see what you pointed at." He repeats the line to his younger sister, who draws a picture of a flashlight with wings. Their father, a schoolteacher before displacement, pins the drawing to the tent wall, where it flutters like a flag. A relief worker photographs the tent, tags it "Proof of Light," and the image appears on the bookmarks now shipping to bookstores in Seoul, Des Moines, and Ljubljana. Chasha buys one, tucks it into the lavender scarf suitcase, and carries it back to Slovenia, where she places it inside the castle's guest book, a silent witness to a journey that began with a timestamp and ended, if endings exist, with a child's crayon beam cutting through desert night. And still the mountain stands, its silhouette now traced in light. Flashlight, bookmark, lullaby, spiral. The sediment keeps settling, but the layers are no longer buried. They are laminated, bookmarked, sung aloud, sampled, remixed, loved across languages. The highlight has become a headlight, the highlighter a lighthouse, the lemon bar recipe a lingua franca. No one orchestrated this choreography. It emerged the way frost flowers form on a window when no one is looking, patterns so delicate they shatter at the touch of blame. The only proper response is to keep the window cold enough for frost, warm enough for breath, open enough for the next layer to form. Evelyn, Devon, Joshua, Minho, Farid, Jade, Martha, Luis, Hyejin, the baritone Marine with the Eagle pop filter. They are all weather now, drifting across the glass, tracing new petals that will melt and reform overnight. If you wake early enough, you can see them before the sun erases the image. A grandmother's vowel, a child's flashlight beam, a librarian's timestamp, a senator's spiral. They do not ask to be remembered forever. They ask only to be noticed today, highlighted in pastel, read aloud to a cat, shared with a stranger who might, in turn, share it with the dawn. Dawn in this story is not a single sunrise but a rolling wave of them, chasing the planet like a gentle alarm clock that never snoozes. Each time zone clicks over, the cat census stretches on a windowsill in Iowa, the castle guest book flutters in Slovenia, the subway tunnel in Seoul exhales overnight air, and the tent in Iraq glows briefly from a battery-powered beam. Somewhere between these small illuminations, the metadata field grows. A new tag appears, #Second Dawn, coined by Min Ho after he notices that many listeners stream the Korean podcast twice, once at night, once again at sunrise, forming an accidental ritual. He begins each episode with the phrase, "Du bionje sebyogieo," it is the second dawn, and ends with a soft click, the sound of a flashlight being switched off. The click becomes a meme, then a ringtone, then a notification sound for an app that reminds users to reread one primary source every morning. The app is called Second Dawn. Logo, a stylized highlighter rising like a sun. It is downloaded 2 million times in the first month, mostly by commuters who want to feel productive while waiting for buses, trains, ferries, or simply for courage. One of those commuters is Kaori, a Tokyo office worker who spends 90 minutes each morning on the Chuo line. She sets the app to 7:12 a.m., just as the train exits a tunnel and daylight floods the carriage. Every day, a single sentence pops up on her lock screen, read aloud in whichever narrator's voice matches her language setting. On a humid Tuesday, the sentence is Evelyn's "weak batteries feel the same everywhere," voiced this time in Japanese by a Hokkaido grandmother named Setsuko. Kaori listens, eyes fixed on the passing city, and suddenly she is crying. Not dramatically, just a soft glaze that blurs the neon signs. She realizes she has never considered the universality of insufficient power. She thought her own fatigue was unique, a private outage. The recognition is small, almost molecular, but it shifts her weight. That evening, she buys a pack of rechargeable batteries, carries them to work, and leaves them in the staff room drawer labeled for the flashlight in the emergency kit. She tapes a yellow sticky note, "From Iowa, with love." No one asks about the note, but the batteries disappear within a week, replaced anonymously, the way kindness sometimes reimburses itself. Kaori takes a photo of the empty drawer, posts it to the Second Dawn forum, tags it #WeakBatteriesTokyo, and the image becomes the app's loading screen for 48 hours, a quiet celebration of circular generosity. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, a graphic design student named Bruno redesigns the loading screen into a looping GIF. The drawer opens, batteries vanish, a faint highlight yellow sun rises, the drawer closes. He adds a subtitle in Spanish, "Donde se va la luz, regresa la luz." Where light goes, light returns. The GIF is reblogged by a popular account that curates micro-utopias, and from there it migrates to WhatsApp stickers, Instagram stories, and eventually to the phone of a community organizer named Valeria, who runs literacy workshops in a hillside neighborhood. Valeria prints the GIF as a black and white flyer, batteries replaced by pencil icons, sun replaced by an open book, and posts it on the community center door. Children who attend the workshop are invited to recharge the communal flashlight by reading one page aloud. Each reading is recorded on an old smartphone. The recordings are uploaded to a cloud folder named Baterías de Palabras, word batteries. A visiting sound artist compiles the recordings into a 12-minute track layered with subway ambience from Tokyo, tunnel reverb from Seoul, and Evelyn's original Midwestern vowels pitched to match the children's higher register. The track is played at a local art fair through a solar-powered speaker shaped like a giant lemon. Visitors sit on hay bales, sipping hibiscus water. Listening to voices in 3 languages describe flashlights, sandbags, and the feeling of being heard. An elderly man leans over to Valeria and whispers, "I never thought my grandson's voice could travel to Iowa." Valeria smiles, points to the speaker and replies, "It already has." In Iowa, Leo receives an email with the subject line, "Your grandmother's voice is in Mexico." Attached is a 30-second clip. A Mexican child reading a Spanish translation of Evelyn's sentence, followed by Evelyn's original English, woven together like a bilingual braid. Leo plays it for Evelyn, who presses a hand to her chest, listens twice, then says, "Well, I'll be." Census. The cat flicks an ear, unimpressed by international fame, but alert to the tremor in Evelyn's voice. The next day, Evelyn bakes lemon bars, wraps them in wax paper, and mails them to Valeria's workshop with a note. For the readers who recharge flashlights with words. The package takes 10 days to clear customs. The lemon bars arrive slightly crumbled but edible. Valeria hosts a tasting session, during which children draw pictures of lemons wearing capes. One drawing is scanned, animated, and turned into a sticker that reads, "Limones de luz," lemons of light. The sticker is slapped onto laptops, water bottles, and, inevitably, flashlights. A factory in Toluca notices the trend and produces a limited batch of yellow flashlights shaped like tiny lemons. The packaging includes a QR code that links to the Second Dawn app. The app, in turn, unlocks a hidden sound, Evelyn's voice saying, "Thank you for keeping the light on," followed by a child's giggle recorded in Mexico City. The giggle is exactly 1.3 seconds long, short enough to function as a notification ping, long enough to carry joy across time zones. Within weeks, phones around the world chirp with the same giggle at unpredictable hours, a soft, bright reminder that someone, somewhere, is reading by flashlight. The giggle also reaches a sleep research lab in Melbourne, where scientists are studying how microsounds affect dream content. They recruit volunteers who agree to be pinged by the giggle during REM sleep. Results are inconclusive but charming. One participant dreams of floating lemons illuminating a dark library. Another dreams of a grandmother who speaks perfect Spanish, though she never studied it. The study is published under the title Cross-Linguistic Giggle, Transfer in Adult Sleep. And though the sample size is small, the paper becomes a cult favorite on academic Twitter, where professors post photos of lemon-shaped stress balls perched on lab equipment. A footnote cites the Second Dawn app, which leads readers to the public ledger, which leads them to the Benghazi cable, which leads them, inevitably, back to the rooftop where weak flashlights once flickered. The circle is no longer a circle. It is a Mobius strip, a single-sided surface that twists forever. Every step forward is also a step back to the same moment, reopened, relit, reread, reheard, reloved. And still, the mountain stands, but its silhouette is now traced in giggles, gifs, lemon bars, rechargeable batteries, solar speakers, hay bales, hibiscus water, sticky notes, and pastel highlights. The trail is no longer a footpath. It is a fiber optic ribbon, a whisper network, a lullaby loop. If you hike it today, you will not find a summit plaque. You will find a small wooden box, weather-sealed, containing a single yellow flashlight and a laminated card that reads, "Point this at anything you need to see better. Return when finished. Batteries included. Gratitude appreciated." The box is never empty for long. Sometimes the flashlight is replaced by a knitted lemon. Sometimes by a bookmark printed with Hangul. Sometimes by a child's drawing of a cat wearing a cape. Who restocks the box? No one knows. Everyone knows. The mountain has become a mailbox, and the mail is always the same message, rewritten in every language, encoded in every giggle. Notice, share, repeat. The dawn will come again. The highlight will rise. The circle will widen. The mountain will lighten. Gram by gram, giggle by giggle, until it floats like a lantern above the valley. Not a burden, but a beacon. Not a verdict, but a vow. That every weak battery will meet its recharge, every dark closet its open door, every reader her second dawn.